Hello, friends. In this lesson, we're just going to go through and identify English word types in a real text. So for this lesson, I've taken the first couple of sentences of a popular children's book called A Wrinkle in Time. The sentences read, "It was a dark and stormy night. In her attic bedroom, Margaret Murray, wrapped in an old patchwork quilt, sat on the foot of her bed and watched the trees tossing in the frenzied lashing of the wind." It's a very descriptive paragraph. So what I'm going to do now is go through and look at each of the 7 word types and try to identify them in this passage. So the first word type we're going to look at are nouns. Now remember, a noun is a word for a person, place, thing, or an idea. So looking at this passage, try to see if you can find the nouns. You can pause the video, try to find them on your own, and then when you're ready, press play, and you'll see me show you where they are. All right, so the first noun here is the word it, and it is a pronoun. So it was a dark and stormy night. The word night is also a noun. It is time of the day. In her attic bedroom. Now here the word attic and the word bedroom are both nouns. Bedroom here is the head noun. Attic is a noun that is describing the bedroom, where the bedroom is. So the attic is a place and the bedroom is also a place. Margaret Murray, this is the name of a girl. So this is also a noun. This is a proper noun because it's a specific name of a specific person. Wrapped in an old patchwork quilt. A quilt is a thing. It's a type of blanket. Sat on the foot of her bed. So foot is a noun and bed is also a noun. Here, foot is not talking about the foot on your body. It's talking about the place of the bed. It's the bottom part of the bed where your feet would go. And the bed is also the place where you sleep. And watched the trees. So trees is a noun. It's a plural noun for things, right? You know, the trees that grow outside. Tossing in the frenzied lashing of the wind. So wind is also a noun. It's a thing, even though you can't see it or touch it. But there's also one more kind of noun here, and that's this word lashing. So lashing is actually a verb normally, but here they're using it in the sentence like a noun. So it's an ing word, which is a form of a verb. So we would call this a gerund because they're taking a verb and they're using it as a noun in a sentence. So in this section here, we've got these nouns. Next, we'll look at the adjectives because adjectives describe nouns. So it'll be helpful to look at them connected with the nouns. So an adjective is a word that describes or modifies a noun. Again, you can pause the video, see if you can find the adjectives on your own. Look for any words that describe nouns. When you're ready, then you can press play on the video and I'll show you where they are. Okay, so it was a dark and stormy night. Here, dark and stormy are both adjectives and they are describing night. Because as we said before, night is a noun. So dark and stormy is describing what the night was like. In her attic bedroom. For the nouns, I said that attic was a noun. Here, attic is still a noun, but it's working like an adjective because it's describing the bedroom. So it's not quite an adjective, but it's working like an adjective. Margaret Murray, wrapped in an old patchwork quilt. So old and patchwork are both describing the quilt, which we said was a noun before. Sat on the foot of her bed and watched the trees tossing in the frenzied lashing of the wind. So the last adjective we're going to see here is this word frenzied, because frenzied is describing the lashing. So when they're talking about lashing of the wind, they mean that the wind is blowing very hard, like it's beating you. Frenzied means it's crazy. Frenzied is a synonym for crazy. Like if somebody's really, really crazy and stressed out, we can say they're frenzied. But here they're talking about the wind being frenzied. So you can imagine looking out the window and seeing the trees and everything else just blowing like crazy. Next, we'll look at determiners because, again, determiners go with nouns, but they identify nouns. So again, you can pause the video, see if you can find any words that identify nouns that are not adjectives. And then when you're ready, press play. Okay, so a, an, and the are the most common determiners that we're going to see in English. So it was a dark and stormy night. So a is identifying the night. The cool thing about determiners is that if you know what they are, they always come at the very beginning of a noun phrase. So it was is a verb. A is the beginning of this noun phrase, a dark and stormy night. All of this here is describing the night. And determiners always go with nouns. So if you see a determiner, just keep reading, and either right after it or a few words after it, you will find a noun. And remember, night is the noun. All right, in her attic bedroom. We said bedroom was a noun. And we said that attic was another noun acting like an adjective. But then we have this word, her. Her is identifying whose bedroom it is. It's not his bedroom, it's her bedroom. So it's identifying the word bedroom. Margaret Murray wrapped in an old patchwork quilt. So again, we said quilt was a noun. Patchwork was an adjective and old was an adjective. And if we move back, we see this word and. And is a determiner. It is identifying the quilt. Remember, a and an basically just mean one. So a dark and stormy night, it means it was one night, but not a specific night. An old patchwork quilt, it means that there was only one quilt, and it's not a specific quilt. It's not her quilt or his quilt or my quilt or your quilt. It's just a quilt. Sat on the foot of her bed. So again, we said bed was a noun. And if we look back, we see her bed, because the bed belongs to Margaret Murray. And if we look back even farther, we see this noun foot and the word the. So the is telling us that it's the specific place on this specific bed. So the foot of her bed. And watched the trees tossing. So we said trees was a noun, and the is telling us we're talking about some specific trees. Because she's looking out her window. So we're talking about the trees that she's seeing outside of her window. So since we're talking about specific trees, we use the word the. Just like we're talking about the specific place on her bed, we say the foot or the trees. Tossing in the frenzied lashing of the wind. So here, this the is identifying the wind. We always say the with the wind, because there's really only one wind. When we're talking about the weather, like even the weather. This the is identifying the lashing, because we said lashing is working as a noun here. So we're talking about the specific thing that the wind is doing. And if you look here, you'll see a, and the. A, and the are your most common determiners, and they're only determiners. That's the only job that they can do. So if you ever see a, and the, you know it's a determiner, and you know it's the beginning of some kind of noun phrase. Next, we'll look at verbs and the verb parts of the sentence. So remember, a verb is a word for an action or a state. And again, you can pause the video, try to find the verbs on your own, and then press play when you're ready to identify them. All right. So every sentence has to have at least one verb in it. That's what makes it a sentence. Every sentence in English will have a verb. Almost every sentence will have a subject and a verb. There are some sentences that don't have a subject, and those are commands. Like if you say open the door, there's no subject there. But every sentence in English has to have a verb. So if you see a period, you know that before the period there has to be a verb somewhere, at least one. There can be more than one though. So in the first sentence here, it was a dark and stormy night. The verb here is was, and that's that be verb. It's just in the past. It was a dark and stormy night. That's the only verb in the sentence. In her attic bedroom, Margaret Murray, wrapped in an old patchwork quilt, sat on the foot of her bed. So here we have the word sat, which is a verb. She sat on the foot of her bed and watched. So there's another verb. She sat and watched the trees tossing in the frenzied lashing of the wind. So the main verbs in this passage are was, sat, and watched. But there are some other words here that are kind of like verbs, but they're not main verbs. So the first one here is this word wrapped. This is what we call a participle. So we're describing how she's sitting there. She's wrapped in the blanket. She's wrapped in the quilt. It's around her. So she sat on the foot of her bed, wrapped in the quilt. So the action isn't actually happening. It happened sometime before. They're just using this to describe the state that Margaret Murray's in. She sat on the foot of her bed and watched the trees tossing in the frenzied lashing of the wind. So here, tossing is kind of like a verb. It's an action, but it's describing the trees. So this is another participle. Wrapped, it's got the ed, so we call this the past participle. And tossing has the ing, so we call this the present participle. So these are kind of like verbs. They are verbs, but they're not working as main verbs in any of the sentences. Was, sat, and watched are the main verbs. So when you're reading something, it's helpful to try and tell the difference between a main verb and some other kind of a verb, like a participle. So the next kind of word we're going to look at are adverbs, because remember, adverbs describe verbs, but they can also describe adjectives or other adverbs. So again, you can pause the video, see if you can find any adverbs. So any describing words that aren't describing nouns, and then press play when you think you found any. So it was a dark and stormy night. None of these are adverbs. In her attic bedroom, Margaret Murray, wrapped in an old patchwork quilt, sat on the foot of her bed and watched the trees tossing in the frenzied lashing of the wind. So in this whole section here, there are actually no real adverbs. The only thing really here is this phrase, wrapped in an old patchwork quilt. This is an adverb kind of phrase. It's called a participle phrase because I said wrapped is a participle. But this is describing how she is sitting on her bed and watching the trees. So it's describing the action of sitting and watching. It's describing the state that she's in. So this whole section here, this participle phrase, is actually working as an adverbial, but it is not a one-word adverb. So when you're looking at a sentence, sometimes you'll see adverbs that are one word, but if you see a phrase or a clause working like an adverb, we call it an adverbial. Next, we'll look at prepositions. Again, prepositions are words that show a relationship in location, time, or direction. So pause the video, look through, and see if you can find any prepositions, any words that are showing a relationship in location, time, or direction. Okay, so it was a dark and stormy night. None of these are prepositions. In her attic bedroom. So the word in is a preposition. It's always a preposition. So in her attic bedroom, Margaret Murray, wrapped in, we see that again, an old patchwork quilt, sat on the foot of her bed and watched the trees tossing in the frenzied lashing of the wind. So all of these are prepositions. When you find prepositions, what you're finding is the beginning of a prepositional phrase. So a prepositional phrase is a preposition plus a noun or a noun phrase. So if I look here, in her attic bedroom, remember bedroom is a noun. So this is a noun phrase. And the preposition comes first. So in her attic bedroom. Margaret Murray wrapped in an old patchwork quilt. There's another noun phrase. Sat on the foot. There's another noun phrase. Of her bed. There's another noun phrase. And watched the trees tossing in the frenzied lashing. There's another noun phrase. Of the wind. There's another noun phrase. So prepositions are kind of cool like determiners, because if you see a determiner, you know there's going to be a noun or after it somewhere. If you see a preposition, you're either going to see a noun after it or a noun phrase after it. In this section here, we saw all noun phrases after the preposition. So if you know the prepositions, that kind of gives you a clue about what's coming next in the sentence. It should be either a noun or a noun phrase. And lastly, we'll look at conjunctions. So a conjunction is a connecting word. It connects words, phrases, or clauses. So again, look through here and pause the video, try to find any conjunctions, and then press play when you think you found them. Okay, so in the first sentence, it was a dark and stormy night. The word and is always a conjunction. So and is connecting dark and stormy. Dark and stormy are both adjectives. And remember, they are describing night. So and here is connecting these two words. In her attic bedroom, Margaret Murray, wrapped in an old patchwork quilt, sat on the foot of her bed and watched the trees tossing in the frenzied lashing of the wind. So I'm going to switch the color here so you can see the difference. So up here, and is connecting two individual words, dark and stormy, two adjectives. Down here, and is connecting sat on the foot of her bed and watched the trees tossing in the frenzied lashing of the wind. So all of this is connected. So and is connecting this part with the other part. Because if you look here, the word sat is a verb and the word watched is a verb. So it's connecting these two verbs and their predicates together. So when you see the word and, it normally is connecting two things that are the same. So up here it's connecting two adjectives together. Here it's connecting two verb and predicates together in a sentence. So sat and watched. And that's it for the different word types in this reading. So again, there's nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, prepositions, conjunctions, and determiners. And we've identified all of them here. Now, if you want to go back to the beginning, you can look at just the basic sentences here and see if you can go through word by word and identify what they are. And if you want to do that right now, again, you can pause the video and then press play, and I'll go through and I'll identify what each of these things are. Okay, so remember, it is a pronoun, so I'll just put noun there. Was a verb, a was a determiner, dark is an adjective, and is a conjunction, stormy is an adjective, night was a noun, in is a preposition, her is a determiner, attic is a noun working as an adjective, bedroom is a noun, Margaret Murray is a proper noun because it's a name, specific name, wrapped is a verb, in is a preposition, an is a determiner, old is an adjective, patchwork is an adjective, quilt is a noun, sat is a verb, on is a preposition, the is a determiner, foot is a noun, of is a preposition, Her is a determiner. Bed is a noun. And is a conjunction. Watched is a verb. The is a determiner. Trees, noun. Tossing, working kind of like a verb here. It's that participle I was mentioning before. In is a preposition. The is a determiner. Frenzied is an adjective. Lashing is working as a noun, even though it's normally a verb. Of is a preposition. The is a determiner. And wind is a noun. All right, so that's it for this lesson. I hope this helped you to make some sense of the different word types in English.